Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Math with Dr. War. Today's lesson is going to focus on how do you find the slope and y-intercept from a table, and also how do you identify the equation of a line given a table. Let's begin. Now if you're on the task test and they give you a table and ask you to find the slope or the y-intercept, it's pretty simple. We're going to start with the slope first. Now, if you're asked to find the slope, your first step is to choose two rows. So I like to make it simple. So I'm going to choose the first row and the second row. Let's line these up under each other. So -8, 2, -6, 3. Now, once you've lined them up under each other, your next step is subtraction. Now, this is my negative for my 6. It's not my subtraction. So I'm going to put my subtraction sign here and here. Remember from the rules of integers, when you have two negatives, they become a positive. So this is actually +6 now. Remember when the signs are different, you subtract. So this would give me a 2. Keep the sign of the larger number. When the signs are different, like this again, I subtract, which would give me 1, and I keep the sign of the larger number. Now, after I've done that, I'm going to find my slope. Slope for us is the change of y over the change of x. X will be your first column and y would be your second column. So who was y? -1. Who was x? -2. Remember, through negatives gives you a positive, so your answer is a half. Your answer is a fraction because the denominator is bigger, and whenever you get a fraction, always check to see if you can reduce to lowest terms. So I found the slope. So remember, if they give you a table and they ask you to find the slope, first step, pick two rows, and you can pick any two rows. I would suggest you pick consecutive rows. So I pick these two. Your next step would to perform a subtraction like you were doing some arithmetic. And then remember, slope is change of y over change of x. And that's how I got a half. Now the y-intercept is easy. You don't have to do any calculations. You're just looking. So remember, the y-intercept is where your line crosses the y-axis. Wherever your line crosses the y-axis, it means you have a value for y. So I'm going to put y there, but your x is 0. So your x has a value of 0, but you actually have a value for y. So I'm going to go in my table to look to see where x is 0. X is 0 right here. So my y-intercept is 6. And if you want to write it as a point, it's 0, 6. We want to find the slope and the y-intercept. So again, pick two rows. You can pick any two rows you want to. So I'm going to pick this one and this one. I'm going to line them up under each other. So I have 4, 10 and 8, 2. Remember, this is x and this is y. Once you've lined them up, subtract. When the signs are different, you actually subtract, which will give me 4. Keep the sign the larger number. When the signs are different, you subtract, which will give me 8. And keep the sign the larger number, so it's going to be a positive. Remember, slope is change over y over change over x. So this will be 8 over -4. And I noticed that my denominator is smaller, so I'm going to see if I can divide this evenly. Now I know a positive divided by a negative is a negative, and 8 divided by 4 is 2. So my slope is -2. I'm now going to find my y-intercept. And remember, your y-intercept is when you have a 0 for the x and then a number for the y. So let's go and see. Okay, looking in the x column, I see the 0 right here, which means 0, 18 is my y-intercept. So you can say the y-intercept is 18. Now let's look at some task-like problems. Now on the task, they'll give you tables and you know they love word problems. So the first one says, the table shows the linear relationship between the balance of a student's savings account and the number of weeks he has been saving. This is the saving account, these are the weeks, and these are the dollars. Based on the table, they want to know what was the rate of change. Now remember with slope, they either use the word slope or they use rate of change of the balance of the student savings account in dollars and cents per week. Now remember, per means divide. So you got the money and then you got the weeks at the bottom. And remember, I said that slope was the change of y over the change of x. So x is your denominator, which means that the weeks is your x and the balance is your y. Another way you can think about it is that the balance depends on the weeks. So the amount of money you get depends on the weeks. So because the balance depends on the weeks is x. And I always tell my students, the x values are always kind of small and simple. So 0, 1, 3, these are kind of small numbers compared to 32, 39, 53. You can always tell who is y. So pick two. I'm going to pick this one and this one. Going to line them upon each other. So whenever the table is laying on its sides, I tell my students, write x and y so you know who you're working with. So this is your first one. So the x is 0 and the y is 32. And then over here, the x is 1 and it's paired with its y, which is 39. Then you're going to subtract. Remember, when the signs are different, you subtract. Keep the sign the larger number. Again, the signs are different, so subtract. Keep the sign the larger number. Remember, slope is change of y over change of x. -7 divided by -1. Two negatives gives me a positive, and because my denominator is smaller, 7 divided by 1 is 7. So your slope is 7 for here. Now sometimes on the task test, they actually specify where they want you to take your points from. If you get a problem like this, please go with the points they specify. So in this question, Joey enlarged a 3-inch by 5-inch photograph on a copy machine. He enlarged it 4 times. The table below shows the area of the photograph after each enlargement. So here's the enlargement, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Numbers look simple, right? Guess what? That's x, which means that the area here is y. So here's your area, which is 15 and goes to 36.6. Now the area depends on the enlargement. So which means because the area depends, the area is y. It says, what is the average rate of change of the area from the original photograph to the 4th enlargement? They want us to go from the original to the 4th. So they're telling us which to choose. So the original would be 0.15 and the 4th enlargement is 436.6. And they want us to round to the nearest 10th. So again, I tell my students, write x and y. X is 0, y is 15. X is 4, y is 36.6. Then you're going to subtract. Signs are different, subtract, keep the sign the larger number. Signs are different, so you're going to subtract, and you're going to get 21.4. And keep the sign of the larger number. Remember, slope is the change of y over the change of x. So the -21.4 is your numerator. The -4 is your denominator. So your answer will be positive. I'm just going to put the plus. Now suppose you're on the non-calculator section. This is easy division. So I'm going to put the 21.4 here and I'm going to put my 4 here. Now 4 goes into 21 5 times. I'm now going to go to my answer choices. Where do I see a 5? Right here. I'm not even going to continue my division. My answer is going to be 5.4. I know that 4 goes into 21 5 times, and there was only one number there that had 5 point something. When they give you a table, they can also ask you to find the equation of the line. Now remember, an equation of the line is y equals mx plus b, where m is your slope. So your slope is always attached to the variable. And b is your constant term, which is your y-intercept. So you only are looking at 2 things here, slope and y-intercept. So I tell my students, whenever you have to find the equation of the line, I like to start first with the y-intercept. because sometimes you might locate the y-intercept and you don't even have to find the slope. Locate your y-intercept if you can. So I go into my table, and remember, your y-intercept is where you have a 0 for x and a value for y. So I put a box. So I go in, I see my 0 here, therefore my y-intercept is 7. Now, remember, your equation for the line is y equals mx plus b, which means you're going to have a plus 7. So I go into my equations to see who has plus 7. So this has a plus 7, maybe. This says plus 1, no. This says plus 11, no. This has plus 9, no. So my answer is A, and I didn't even need to find the slope. You have two things here, slope and y-intercept. I always start with the y-intercept because sometimes when you locate the y-intercept, you can find your answer right away. Now, if the y-intercept is not given, that's when you need the slope. We have another problem. So remember, we're going to look for the y-intercept first. And then we're going to look for slope if needed. So the table shows the amount of pet food in cups remaining in an automatic feeder as a function of the number of meals the feeder has dispensed. So this is the automatic feeder. You have number of meals dispensed in, amount of pet food remaining, F of n, which is cups. So you have to figure out who is x and who is y. So I tell my students, look into the equations. Now notice this says Fn equals, which means this Fn is your y. So this is y, which means this is x. Because remember, the variable is always attached to the slope, so you know that's your x. Okay, can we find the y-intercept? I don't see a 0 here. So I'm like, okay, no y-intercept. So let's go for the slope. So again, let's pick 2. So I'm going to pick this and this one. So I have 6, 6, 7, 3. Remember, you're going to subtract. Signs are different, so I subtract. So I'm like, okay, 7 minus 6 is 1. Keep the sign a larger number. Signs are different, so I subtract. I get 3. And keep the sign of the larger number. 6 is the bigger number, so it's positive. So my slope is going to be 3 over negative 1, because remember, slope is the y over the x. A positive divided by a negative is a negative, and 3 divided by 1 is 3. So my slope is negative 3, and my slope is the one that's attached to the variable. So I'm looking for a negative 3n. So where is negative 3n? It's here. No. Oh, it's here as well. And no. So I have two equations that have the slope. So I'm looking at the y-intercepts now, because this one says 24 and this says 64. Because remember, there are only two things in this problem, slope and y-intercept. So now we have to go back to the y-intercept. Is it 24 or is it 64? So let's go back to our table. So you had 1 and 21, 3 and 15, 6 and 6, and 7 and 3. Now remember, your y-intercept starts with what? 0. So here's 1, which means this will be 0. So we have to look to see what will be the best number to pair with 0. You have 24 and you have 64. Now remember, these numbers have to be close in value. So if this is 21 and this is 15, then who should be here? Should it be 64 or 24? The answer is 24 is reasonable. 64 is too far. Look at these numbers. You're going 21 to 15 to 6 to 3. I wouldn't put 64. That is like a humongous jump. So your answer is F. Mr. Patel fills a swimming pool with water. When he started, the pool already contained 1,500 gallons of water. The table below shows the number of gallons of water in the pool after filling it for H hours. So for this one, they did label, yay. So you see G here and H. So who is G and who is H? I go to the equations because that would help me. Notice all the equations start with G. Remember, the equation of the line is always y equals to mx plus b. So it's always y equals, which means G is y. So this is y, which means this is x. So therefore, the gallons of water depends on the number of hours. And again, remember, I told you your x is always simple numbers, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Our table is written backwards. So what I'll do is, and I did this in my class, I drew another column here and I put x. If you want to, you can put x. And I just wrote 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I like it over here. It makes it easier for my brain. So remember, there are only two things we're looking for here. Y-intercept, if they have it. If they don't, then we'll find slope. So two things, y-intercept, slope. So can we find a y-intercept? Let's go to our table. Yes, remember the y-intercept is when you have 0 for your x and then a value for your y. So yay, there's our 0 and here's our y, 1500. The 1500 is your y-intercept, which is your b, which means this is just a constant number. I'm looking for where it has a plus 1500. Remember, your y-intercept will not have a variable. So I go in and I notice that even though this is written backwards, this right here is my y-intercept. So my answer is H. I did not need to find the slope. So here, this was a pretty simple problem. Just by looking here, I realized I did have the y-intercept. It was 1500. I was looking for where I had a plus 1500. If it is the y-intercept, it will not have a variable attached to it. So right here, I excluded this because this has a variable attached to it. So they're saying that this 1500 represents the slope. No. That 600, no. Okay, the 600 is with the H, which means that's your slope. This 1500 here has the H, so with the H next to it, that would say it's slope. So no. So we got our answer and didn't even have to find the slope. So it says the table gives selected values for the linear function f of x. So here's your x, here's your f of x. So they kindly labeled for us. And it basically says which of these functions has the same slope as f of x. So let's find the slope for here. So I'm going to choose 5 and 12 and 10 and 19. And then I'm going to subtract. Signs are different. So I subtract, keep the sign the larger. Signs are different. So I subtract, keep the sign the larger. Remember, slope is your change of y over the change of x. -7 over -5. Two negatives gives you a positive, so you have 7 over 5. Okay, so let's go in here and see who has a slope of 7 over 5. And remember, if you're the slope, you're going to have the variable attached to it. 7 over 5x, so my answer is D. If you're ever given a table and they ask you to find the slope or rate of change, remember, pick two rows, line them up, subtract, and then remember slope is the change of y over the change of x. And also be careful with your operations with integers. If they want you to find the equation of the line, remember that's only two things. The equation of the line involves your y-intercept and your slope. I suggest you find the y-intercept first. If it's not there, then go for your slope. Sometimes by finding the y-intercept, you can find your equation. Sometimes the y-intercept is not given, so then you have to find the slope. And when you find the slope, you can identify your equation. It is not that difficult. I hope this lesson has been helpful. Good luck in your Tasc examination. This is a high emphasis problem. And please remember, like, share, and subscribe. Have a great day.